Hello, everyone. Malolele, talofalava. Thank you all for joining us today. I am Estella Owima Church, pronoun she, her, Executive Director of EPIC, Empowering Pacific Islander Communities. And on behalf of both EPIC and NAPHOF and our panelists today, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to our discussion this evening or afternoon, wherever you're zooming in from, highlighting Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Equal Pay Day and the economic inequities that Pacifica peoples are facing. And for today's panel in particular, are women. The wage gap we experience as Pacifica women and laborers is just a single strand or a part of a much larger net of economic injustices that really hamper our ability to care for ourselves, for our families, and for our communities. Confronted by such structural inequities, this important conversation really continues our work around equal pay, and it doesn't end here. On average, NHPI women, or Native Hawaiian Pacifica women, including part-time and seasonal workers, earn 61 cents for every dollar earned by a white non-Hispanic male. And typically wage data combines and calculates on average or in average for all Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander women, amounting to about 80 cents per white non-Hispanic male dollar. However, this data doesn't fully show or encapsulate our entire narrative or stories, because that data, when disaggregated, reveals a lot more or several other inequities that our communities face. The impact of the wage gap is not just about cents to a dollar. It's also about our real lived experiences. And the wage gap has, in a lot of ways, exacerbated economic challenges that our communities have faced, whether it's related to childcare, healthcare, our abilities to save for our families, for tough times. And as we continue to figure out what life post-pandemic might look like or be, a lot of those things continue to be on our mind and are even more pressing for many of our families. So today's panel discussion serves as a critical reminder to have this conversation and more like it, to support research and policy efforts that center the lived experiences of NHPI communities, and to also amplify our narratives. And so to get started, I'd like to introduce our panelists. And before I do that, just a few housekeeping manners. We will save time for Q&A at the end of our session. And if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A window, not the chat function in your Zoom. And we'll do our best to answer as many of those questions as possible when we get to the Q&A. Today's briefing is also being recorded and we'll share out with listservs after the session. And if you're not already signed up to receive updates from EPIC and NAPHOF, please visit naphof.org and empoweredpi.org and join those subscription or mailing list. And with that, I welcome our first panelist, Shadell. Shadell is the founder of Aloha Youth Organization in Oregon, a nonprofit that engages Aloha youth and provides space and activities to build community and connection. The mompreneur balances life as a mom of 4 and her personal goals. Raised on the island of Molokai, she later moved to Aloha, Oregon. Shadell has been in the healthcare field, starting from a housekeeper or caregiver to HR and benefits administration. And she's faced challenges during the pandemic, or while facing challenges in the pandemic. She decided to quit her job after 10 years and attend full-time to her kids. She began pursuing her entrepreneurial ideas and has kept up with hobbies. One of those was to open up a rec center in a small unincorporated community called Aloha, Oregon. And the goal was to open a building where kids could help foster community and offer programs that would support the youth's goal. This was another way that Shadell could be with her kids and continue to serve our communities wherever the need was. And so thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, evening, Shadell. Appreciate you being here. And I would also like to introduce our next panelist, Ruta. Ruta is Samoan woman from the villages of Fasito o Uta and Malie, and she has been a traditional birth attendant for the last 10 years, supporting birth both in and out of hospitals, and committed to this calling as one tactic for preserving autonomy and innate wisdom of marginalized peoples on the front lines of the climate crisis and under the collapse of capitalism. She deeply believes that each pregnancy, birth, postpartum experience presents an opportunity to heal our communities and is passionate about connecting our people to self-empowerment within the medical industrial complex. In 2019, she was blessed with an opportunity to found Mana Pacifica, whose mission is to maintain ancestral knowledge and autonomy in the Pacific Islander community through education and direct support. In addition to Mana, she is building out her work as a speaker and advocate for the advancement of NHPI and API spaces, specifically in regards to health, well-being, and the allocation of resources. And we are super excited to have you, Ruta, as well, joining us. First question, before we get into the first question, I would like to welcome you both to share a little bit more about you, your work, and what brings you to the conversation this evening. And I will pass it to Shadell.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shadell. I currently live in Aloha, Oregon. I'm from Molokai. And I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to speak among my fellow community members. I think it's important to highlight the pay gap between us Pacific Islanders and women on top of that. And so I was so honored to be a part of this conversation. Currently, what I'm trying to do in Aloha, Oregon is open a rec center so that kids just have an opportunity to build community, be supported in their goals. We live in an unincorporated community in Oregon. And so sometimes the resources are very lacking in that area, and we want kids to be able to have options and opportunities aside from really being forced to do things that you don't want to do because you don't have enough opportunities. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Shadell. And Ruta.
My name is Fuatino Ruta Lauleva Luaiufiai Ono. As Estella shared, I come from the villages of Fasito'ota and Malie in Western Samoa, and also from San Francisco in the Bay Area. What brings me to the conversation today is really any opportunity that we can highlight Pacific Islanders, given our long history of just like aggregation into the API umbrella, where a lot of times our data gets overlooked. I'm excited to participate in, and especially Pacifica women, right? Because, you know, when we talk about women's labor, a lot of times women's labor, women's work of caretaking the family, caretaking the community, literally growing the culture, maintaining the culture, like that in and of itself is unpaid labor, right? And so then again, when we like suffer this injustice as Pacifica women of having this, you know, this large wage gap that we're dealing with in paid spaces, and then to go home and, you know, as Islanders, we're known for pouring our hearts out and pouring ourselves into everything that we do. And then we see the health inequities that our community is experiencing, like it all really adds up, you know. And so this conversation, I think, is a great place to start in addressing like a multitude of issues that we're dealing with. And then a little bit more about Mana Pacifica. Basically, like, you know, the people in the organization are birth workers. And, you know, before we got on camera today, we were talking about how birth, it reaches into every aspect of our community and every aspect of our cultures, right? Because birth and pregnancy, like, those are how we tend to the seeds that will eventually like bear the fruits in the next generations. And so we really approach the maintaining ancestral knowledge and autonomy piece from this place of like, we come from strong histories, rich histories of health, cultural wealth, you know, and then we see how our folks are doing in the United States and doing in diaspora, and it's not adding up, right? And so we're really approaching the birth work as a place that we can make an impact that will ripple out. And so right now we're having monthly support groups for mothers and families. And then we will shortly be starting childbirth education specifically for Pacifica families, and then also a birth navigator training, so that our community altogether can kind of have space to remember this knowledge that really is not too many generations back, so that we can all work together to kind of repair the spot that we're at. So that's it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. I have so many questions and things that I want to talk about, but also want to stay focused on our conversation here. But some of what you both have just shared has me thinking a bit about my family's history and how we came here. And my mother's from the village of Satufia, Savai'i, Samoa, and my father's from Calabar, Nigeria, and I was raised on Tongva lands, for now known as South Central Los Angeles. And lately, I've been thinking a lot about how, you know, my mother being the eldest, firstborn, myself as well, was sent here with this notion that just by virtue of being here, she'd be able to get an education and earn enough to then continue to take care of our village, our homelands. And that just has not been the case. We're 3 generations in now, and still very much struggling and trying to figure out how we continue to do what we know to do as caretakers. And a lot of times, multi-generational caretakers looking after our elders and our young folks. And it's easy to forget ourselves in that work. Given that you both serve in 2 states where we have large NHPI populations, what are some of the ways that of late, the pandemic in particular, but also just in your respective fields, how have you been able to care for yourself while continuing to look after the folks, our communities, and the folks within our households? And whoever is ready to jump in. Yeah.
I'll jump in. I felt like the pandemic came out of nowhere. I mean, I don't watch the news as much, and so for me, it just felt like it was very blindsiding. You know, it came in, it looked around, it made a mess, and it didn't really go anywhere. It just kind of stayed and lingered pretty much to this day. And so a lot of us weren't prepared. I know I wasn't prepared. I don't know about y'all, but I've never lived through a pandemic in my entire life. So it was really being forced to live with a new normalcy that we were not experienced in at all. But there was a lot of fear around, what do we do? Like, what's going to happen? I live in Oregon, and so Oregon went into shutdown. Nobody could do anything. You couldn't go anywhere. And at the time, I was working a full-time job. I'm a single mom of 4. And so when you're put in this position where you got to decide, like, do I keep my job, or, you know, do I go home and take care of the household? And so I was just in this position where I had to say, okay, well, obviously my kids come first, and that might mean without any income. And eventually we had to start living on my savings. Thank God I had savings, but even that's hard to kind of save up for a while. And after my savings ran out, we had to depend on government assistance. And so it's just kind of like this trickle effect of, like, you're not trying to get to that point, but because of the circumstances that we face as like women, Pacific Islanders, people of color, that's kind of like our last resort or like our only option. I've even had conversations with some of my PI friends in Oregon that had to kind of go through the same situations, deciding somebody's got to stay home with an older member. Two incomes become one income. And a lot of the times we do a lot of free work because we're natural caregivers. And so a lot of it was just fear-based. Food prices went up for us. A lot of people that had to quit working didn't have access to medical care anymore. And so that really took a toll on, specifically for me, because, you know, financially, emotionally, mentally, when you try so hard to get out of that like rut and then being hit with like a situation like the pandemic, it kind of scares you. But I do want to shout out an organization called KALO, KALO, and they are an amazing organization, a Hawaiian Civic Club in Beaverton, Oregon. And they did not hesitate to go out to just support the PI community. They were giving food boxes on the weekends. They were providing vaccines for our community, making it available for whoever wanted it. So, I mean, shout out to those organizations doing that in a time of uncertainties, because those are that kind of work is how we close the gap. This kind of work, these panel discussions, voices are being heard, and people are just bringing awareness to, hey, there's still a gap here, and generations has gone by and we're still like struggling. So that's kind of how I saw the pandemic during those years. And thank God we had organizations to support the PI community, but you know, some of us just don't even hear about them. So
Thank you, Shadell, for sharing. There was a lot of, I think it's, again, to Ruth's point earlier, it's, as Islanders, we're gonna show up for community, and there were many organizations, PI organizations that were born, grew up during the pandemic in direct response to COVID and getting our families what they needed: food, vaccines, PPE, rides. There were people who just needed rides to vaccine clinics, and our folks were organizing carpools all up and down California to get people to the nearest vaccine setup, which could have been hours away from some of our more rural towns. So yeah, thank you for that. Ruta, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Maika is definitely an organization that like grew up in the height of the pandemic. Like we started at the end of 2019. And so it's, you know, I think the pandemic really highlighted the state of affairs when it comes to Pacifica health in this country, right? In ways that I think, kind of like coincided with whatever institutions or organizations like starting to disaggregate data. But I feel like in the ways that we hold story in our communities, and like just from our own experience, we know that we're experiencing these like, really high rates of like negative health situations, but we didn't, in the pandemic, I feel like we finally were seeing the numbers, and our community was finally like getting some resources, but if not resources, like recognition to begin to start being able to mobilize and be like, hey, this is like really serious, right? And like the comorbidity stuff, all the pre-existing health conditions that made us more at risk, when it comes to mana, those are the things that also put our PI birthing people and mothers in high risk birth categories, right? The chronic illness, high blood pressure, all these things. And so I think that in a way, like one of the, kind of like, I don't even want to say benefits, because I don't want to say that about the pandemic, but like one of the things that grew out of the the ashes of the pandemic and the stuff that we were dealing with was that a lot of the community organizations started coming together to see how can we support these like underlying factors that are putting us at a disadvantage when it comes to like global situations, right? And then the other thing is like, I feel like social media really took off in a way during, during the pandemic, right? Because that's how we were all staying connected. And I've seen this huge shift in consciousness around how we see ourselves as Pacific Islanders, like how we're situated within, the United States, how we're situated in diaspora in terms of like, how are we faring as Indigenous people, right? Because when we've been seen as like just the PI and API, but like the invisible PI and API, there wasn't data to like, there wasn't that storytelling on a larger like institutional level about our folks. But then now, not only have the institutions started to tell the story, but like the social media has really been spreading the stories, right? And our people are really connecting about just similar experiences and what's been working, what hasn't been working. And so that's been a really beautiful like side effect of the pandemic, is seeing how we can all kind of collaborate. And in terms of self-care, like, I don't know, I'll be honest, like the pandemic really stressed me out when it came to birth work, because like I've been doing this work since 2013. And so basically half of my experience of being a birth worker has been in the pandemic. And I think one of the strongest things that we have going as Pacifica people are our families. And so when we were sending our birthing people into the hospitals without their families to support them, that was really challenging, right? And showing up in the hospitals and seeing these young families getting like pressured into doing things that if they had their auntie or their mom to be like, nah, we're not doing this, we're not doing that, things might have gone different, was really hard. And so I've had to get creative in terms of self-care, but I've been really relying on my own family for support, on my partner's family for support, and just enjoying the fellowship and like really appreciating the moments when we can come together. So yeah.
Thank you both. Self-care is one of those things that is hard lesson learned and is always in process. Also think being of Indigenous communities and navigating our way through diaspora, it's easy to be sold a narrative of what self-care is supposed to be and looks like. And it's also easy to buy into it growing up here in the continental US. And so, relationship with self-care is one that is continuing to grow. But the pandemic definitely forced a pause and moment for reflection. I transitioned into EPIC after, pandemic isn't over, but it's changed, but transitioned after being an educator for nearly 2 decades. And one thing that became very clear when I was in the classroom and considering leaving teaching, our bodies are beyond expendable, or at least that's what folks think. Our bodies as Indigenous peoples, as PI folks, as people of color, we are seen as exposable or disposable. And it was clear to me when my last year in the classroom, I lost 3 colleagues on campus, all 3 of them Black men, none of them related to COVID, all related to stress or community violence. And that was really hard to sit with. And so I'm wondering, actually, because of the labor that our folks typically take on, we're in positions in warehouses and airports and caregiving. There is a large emotional toll and also often a physical toll on our bodies. And I am wondering, what does the workforce look like to you or for you in your respective fields? And what are some of the barriers you might have experienced as leaders in your organization or in the industry at large? And maybe what might be some potential ways that we provide collective care support for our folks. And I will, leave it there, whoever's ready to take it.
So this one, I think like just to dial it back a little, like, you speaking about sharing about your mom coming over here with the American dream, right? Of like, we're all supposed to come over here, work really hard, and start making money. And that's like literally the goal, especially as like immigrants. That's all we were supposed to be doing over here. It's really hard. And it makes me so happy to hear that, Shadell, you were able and you took the step to be like, no, I'm going to choose my family right now, because this is actually the only thing that makes sense. And like, especially under the pandemic and especially under the collapse of capitalism, I feel like we've really been seeing like, oh, this can all just go away. Like, all it takes is some people to decide like, okay, we're just going to do it a different way for it to go away. And so to like prioritize our families. But I think that a lot of times, like in the workforce, there's, it's that sticky place of where like colonization, the culture of colonization and capitalism and white supremacy gets mixed into our indigenous cultures as it like comes over here. So now we think that it's like our cultural practices to literally like work until we die, right? And then it becomes this like point of pride. And so it's been really challenging. Of course, my work is like so related to birth work, but to see the ways to learn in other cultural contexts about the importance of the postpartum period, right? And to caretake in the postpartum period, to rest in the postpartum period. And then we have so much pressure, internal and external pressure on our families to like get back to it, right? And just get back into it, either because of something that, our families or ourselves are telling us that we have to do, or because we just have to put food on the table. And, the barriers that I see in terms of the workforce and doing this work, like birth work from our Pacifica community members that I've spoken to, like having a natural birth, having a nice postpartum, even the like Instagram aside, because I feel like Instagram is kind of messing everyone up, being like, oh, everyone's supposed to take a baby moon, everyone's supposed to do this, that, and the other. And it's like, we could just have like really basic ways of caring for the family. But a lot of our folks feel like these like extra or like special ways of treating pregnant people and postpartum people are white, are situated in the realm of whiteness, middle class, thin white womanness, right? And it doesn't feel like it's something that, in my experience in working with people, is for us, right? And so I think that a barrier that I experience, that Mana experiences, is that we don't have too many people who are doing birth work coming from the Pacifica community. So like when people are Googling, can I get a doula? Can I get a midwife? It's always someone else. And I think white women take up a lot of space in the birth industry. And so people, again, our folks aren't seeing this reflection of like, that could be me. Like because our people are so community oriented too. A lot of times it takes, oh yeah, my cousin did this, or I see that person, I can relate to that person, therefore I can allow myself that kind of space and that kind of care. And so not having too many people in the birth work industry has definitely been a barrier, but something that Mana is trying to address through doing these like birth navigator trainings, right? And not necessarily going to like professionalize the work, but really trying to like give everyone the knowledge so that we can kind of like reorient ourselves culturally as Pacifica people to just be like, yeah, when you see a pregnant mom, ask her, does she want a massage? Do the dishes for her, like do the extra stuff. Let's focus on the birth givers and not just the babies. And so, I think just trying to kind of like reorient ourselves culturally.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I shared before we hopped on or went live that I was searching for someone and couldn't find someone, and the birthing experience was a real traumatic, painful one. And no one told me that postpartum was allowed to be longer than 3 months. And so I really struggled feeling like I'm not, like I rushed back to the classroom because I was like, I'm supposed to be working, got to take care of my family and this child that I just had. And I wish someone had said to me, it's okay that the postpartum process, whatever your process is longer or is as long as you need it to be. And I actually didn't hear those words from someone until very recently when I was able to get a therapist who looked like me. That was when I was able to have that conversation. So I appreciate you sharing that. Shadell, yeah, any of your thoughts on that too?
Yeah, before I answer that question, I just want to jump on what you guys said, about social media, about searching for someone, representation matters. And so even when you look on YouTube and you try and type in something, you're looking for maybe like someone to help you work out, it's all full with like white content and we don't get a lot of representation. Sometimes I have to put in there Pacific Islander trainer or Black trainer. And it's like, why do we have to type those things in? But so representation matters, by the way. Going back to the question, what does the workforce look like? For me, I started off many moons ago as a housekeeper. And at the time, that just seemed like the route, like the job for someone like me, a Black Pacific Islander and a female. And so I knew for sure, oh yeah, I'd be hired. That's like the go-to job. And so that's because of the lack of resources that I had at the time. That was the thing that a lot of us went for. And I ended the traditional workforce during COVID, actually, when I realized that all these years of working, it seemed like you were saying, Estella, you felt like you had to go back to work after you had children. I did the same. I didn't even finish my maternity leave because I was like, I had to work. I had to go back to work. I had to take care of my family. And so after COVID, it just kind of switched my perspective of like, yeah, we're not working till we die, like, and have nothing to show for it. Like, we're not doing that anymore. Like, we're tired of working. We're tired of being in like this survivor mode of having to choose between our families and work. Like, we can do two. I've seen a lot of people that don't look like us do both. So why should we have to decide that? So I ended the workforce during COVID as HR benefits and for a construction company and a healthcare company. And basically I just put together health plans for employees. And that's when I learned that you can take a longer maternity leave. Like, I actually had to be in that position to know that, to tell like the other employees, like, no, you don't have to come back after a week of like taking care of you have like 3 months. If you're stressing about it during pregnancy, you have an additional 3 months. And a lot of people that look like us don't know that at all. And so we rush back to work. We put ourselves in these positions where we're drained, we're tired, we're like mentally like stressed out, but for some reason, we have to keep going. Like, that is like what's instilled in our heads that, yeah, you guys got to keep going. Sorry. But I decided I'm not doing that. And then I thought during the pandemic, if I can start from a housekeeper and work my way up to a benefits coordinator with no college education, no formal training, like, there's other things that I can do with my time. Like, I have 4 kids, like there's other things that I can do. And then I was reminded of a scripture where God told Moses, use what's in your hands. Like, what are you good at? Like, what do you have? And how can I balance this with my family so I don't have to work all day for someone else and then the leftovers come back for my family? And so that's what I did. During the pandemic, I became an independent contractor for everything that I was good at. I had a camera. I went out. I was asked to take photos of people's events because they want to document for historical purposes. So I did that. I still do that today, mostly Pacific Islander events or Black events. I braid hair. So I braid my daughter's hair anyway. And I started braiding for other people's families. Like, everything that I was good at, I went out. That way I could still balance family life. and make an income for my family. I got involved with Black Pacifica, which actually came from EPIC, if I'm not mistaken, and it's just a space for individuals who are half Black and half Pacific Islander, and we're just trying to change the narrative of Black people in our respective Hawaiian community. And then it just went on, and then I founded in March Aloha Youth Organization of Oregon, which is becoming a rec center for the town. So yeah, while a lot of good things came out of our survivor mode instincts, I don't believe that we have to operate that way at all. There should be an equal playing field for us. Why do we have to decide between our family and our career? And unfortunately for people in our community, we have to start from scratch. We're not handed anything. Nothing is given to us. And sometimes when we're forced to choose between work and our family, a lot of us fall under the welfare family stereotype. And that becomes like a bad stigma on people in our community. I honestly don't believe people want to end up like that. It's just that we just have this gap that we're in that we're trying to get out of. So those are some of the barriers that I experienced. Another barrier that I experienced as well, being Pacific Islander, is our accent. And when I first moved to Oregon, it was so strong. Nobody that I worked with understood what I was saying. And so a lot of times when I get in rooms, especially today with people that are like super highly educated or rooms that are not very diverse, somehow my accent gives off the idea that the conversation doesn't matter. She doesn't know what she's talking about. So it's really important for us leaders that are in these rooms to show up anyway, to speak, because representation matters. If it wasn't for like the strong women around me who are doing wonderful things in the community, I would have never known that, oh yeah, we can do that too, despite of all the barriers that's trying to hold us back. And if we continue to show up and represent and speak and have panel discussions like this, we can break barriers for people that are wanting to do the same, especially younger kids that are watching us too. So I also want to say, one of the things that I love about the PI community and the Manawahines is that we can make something out of nothing, like every time. Even during diversities, we can grow something from dust. We're natural pioneers, we're innovators, and that's something that I believe has been passed down to us during adversities. We always show up and we always create and we always do things to make change. So
Yes. We are Indigenous scientists and wayfinders and bridge builders and all the things. And something you and Ruta said, like Ruta, I think you said it earlier about our ways have gotten mixed in with these other ways, and we've now bought into or taken on so much of it as if it's our own. And recently I've been really asking, like, in our diasporic voyage, like so many of our generations now here or off island, more even, like the recent census data shows that more of our Kanaka are off island as opposed to on island. And even just thinking about that kind of hurts my heart, but also like thinking about the ways that we continue to navigate our diasporic voyages. How do we get back to all the things that are us, like at our core, have always been us, and all the answers that our ancestral knowledge and wisdom has already gifted us, really. And I feel like it's a matter of like digging through the muck and sorting through and unlearning the things that we've come to believe are ours while in diaspora. Again, like now I've am taking notes as you both share, and there's so many other conversations that I want to get into and want to figure out how we continue the conversation. But another question that I did want to ask is, you've both alluded to it or highlighted that many of our households are multi-generational. And as a classroom teacher, something I experienced at the height of the pandemic was many of my students, because of the pandemic, their families were moving in with one another just to survive and make ends meet. And for us, it's been, for our community in particular, it's just been a way of life, of growing up. A lot of us grew up in households where, we got sibling cousins. Like, there are cousins, but we've been together since we were born. And so they're sibling cousins, and being raised with aunties and uncles and grandparents in the house, 3 generations deep at least. I'm curious to know if that's been your experience as well. And if so, if there are any ways in particular that also has impacted your work, or ways you've been able to navigate through the last few years.
I think the multifamily situation, that's super normal for our community. I mean, I didn't even realize it was abnormal, to be honest, because that's just something our community did. I didn't really understand when I was younger why we did that. I mean, we lived with aunties, uncles, cousins, everybody, and it just seemed really normal. Even when I moved to Oregon and my older 2 siblings moved, there was periods of time where we would live with each other, and it was almost this unspoken way of living, like, okay, one of ours is falling on hard times, like, I got you. And that's just the way we operated. And I think we'll always operate like that, because that's something that we've always done through the generations. But determining where that style of living came from, I mean, I would assume it's, like you said, we're just trying to survive, really. And that doesn't only mean financially. Like, a lot of trauma has been passed down to us from whatever reason. And so it's not only financial, trying to survive, it's mental health issues that a lot of us have been passed down, unforeseeable events, life changes, getting care because, I don't know, maybe you were married and then you divorced and now you have all these kids, and getting the family support. So there could be a lot of factors that determine that kind of living. But, it just goes back to, like, we're just trying to survive, and listen, we're done trying to survive. We want to live now. So how do we get to that?
Yeah, I love that. I think it's like, it's so interesting the ways that some of our cultural practices too have like stayed, but the narrative around them has changed, right? Because here, like, we have to live together sometimes because that's how we're going to be able to make rent, right? And that's how someone, some of the sisters are going to be able to put away some savings because we're all living together and splitting this rent. And then I think I just am always so interested in the ways that, like, because that's how we live when we're in our homelands, right? Is like everyone's together. If we're not under the same roof, we're like in the same little circle of roofs. And, when this child is getting irritating or this parent is being too strict, then the child goes and runs away to the grandparents' house and hides out there until everything could calm down. Or, these people have resources to send this child to school or whatever it is. And I had two like extreme ends of it. When I was living in Samoa, we lived in a household that was, with my granny, 2 aunties, my dad, and, cousins all under one roof. We had the family store in the front, so I would go help my granny up there. And I loved that way of living, even though sometimes I was just talking to my homegirl about this. I feel like every Islander family has that one like scary auntie that, it's just like, just like extra harsh, but it comes from a place of love. And so, there's some lightweight trauma from that, but also I find myself, navigating that line of like being the strict auntie, but trying to leave behind the like the generational trauma causing meanness that can happen when that role gets shifted in capitalism. But anyways, like I lived in that and I loved it, and I loved just having different people to talk to. I really cherished the time that I had with my granny, like just helping her. And I feel like living in a multi-generational household too, like really instilled in me a sense of responsibility in terms of like, you take care of stuff, right? I feel like as Islanders, we have that Samoan saying like, a Samoan from the way that they walk, they talk, and they sit. And, I feel like Islanders, we know how to act, right? Someone's carrying something heavy, you run and pick it up for them. Some auntie is holding a big bag, you go and grab it. And I think that for me, a lot of that came from being in a multi-generational household where there was always going to be someone to be like, hey, you're supposed to be doing this, right? And then on the other extreme of that, I lived in a household with just my dad and my brother, completely isolated in Western New York from any kind of Islander community, from any kind of family. And so it was, I longed for that, right? I really longed for family. I longed for community. And, in reflecting on this question, it's been, in some ways, I feel like I have benefited from, even though it was really hard for my dad to not live with family, because we weren't in that multi-generational structure when we moved to the United States. And because frankly, I was like being raised around a lot of white kids that were like just kind of like doing whatever and being allowed to like explore different things and explore different avenues. Like I was definitely had to go to college, but then after college had some space to figure out what I wanted to do, right? Because my dad, he had his stuff down, he had his new wife and they had their lives. And I wasn't having to like directly contribute to the household. And so I didn't have that pressure to get into a job right away. And in hindsight, like, I think if I hadn't had that space, it would have taken me a lot longer to find my way into holistic health, natural health, herbal medicine, natural birthing, all these kinds of things, because I would have been in that survival mode that a lot of our families are in, right? And I think that even is a barrier now as I talk to community members about like, hey, do you want to consider this birth work, right? It's a big jump to be like, okay, yeah, I'm going to commit to birth work. I'm going to go learn how to do this. I'm going to have an on-call schedule because people birth any time of day or night. I could be there. I've been at births for 4 days in a row, but how to balance that with having a 9-to-5 job so we have a continuous income. It can be hard when you're in that multi-generational structure. And so, yeah, it's just been, I have an interesting relationship with it. But I think that, what the work that I'm trying to do, that we're trying to do in Mana is like really reestablish if we can't have multi-generational households anymore, like how can we kind of reintegrate into a multi-generational like community structure where the young people are getting to tap into the elders' knowledge, and how can the elders be empowered to like share their knowledge when we're living in diaspora and be encouraged to bring the things from the islands and really share them and see that those things have value and worth, and that frankly like white people will pay thousands of dollars to hear about in a workshop, but they don't feel comfortable to like share it in our own homes, so really trying to like reclaim that space around our stories and our knowledge is something that I'm really interested in doing. And hopefully as we begin to have babies in circumstances where the parents have that support, that the babies can then be raised with the aunties passing down knowledge again and kind of reclaiming that structure in capitalism and in diaspora.
Thank you, both of you. Something that I'm thinking about, just reflecting, hearing you. I also grew up multi-generational household, except I grew up in a real traditional West African household, and very similar like practices and ways of being as Indigenous folks between my Nigerian and Pacifica relatives. And I remember rushing to move out of the house. I moved out at 16, just trying to assert that I'm grown and it is time for college. And listening to you both share, I'm like, yeah, my dad comes from, my grandfather had multiple wives, and there's a compound of families that work together. And my grandparents in Samoa have land, and each of my aunties and uncles are in a fale along that strip of land, like they're together. And I don't know where or when I thought I had to move out early, but to your point, I also don't know that I would have been able to finish college had I stayed in that multi-generational setting. I was a freshman undergrad, like, and I had my youngest brother in a baby carrier with me at school because I couldn't afford to find a babysitter to support with my two youngest siblings. And so so there's like definitely some pros and cons. And I also am sitting with like thinking about economic justice and what it would look like to be able to thrive and not feel so much pressure to rush back to work and have some security that our basic needs are being met. Like the downside is that I did go to college, but now I'm sitting here with all this debt, right? Like that I don't know how to manage, that I can't get from under, that is still very much impacting me and the ability to care for my elders who, like, I know I have to now re-enter into a multi-generational situation because it is my responsibility to take care of my aging parents. And so all of that is like swarming in my mind. What the solution is, I'm not quite sure. And I appreciate both of you sharing so much of your stories because I think sharing, just by way of sharing your narratives, helps us collectively get closer to possibilities and Pacifica futures that truly work for our communities and have both our ancestors and our elders at heart, all their wisdoms, but also empowers our next generation to lead in all the ways that are fitting for our communities. And we are just about out of time. I didn't see any questions pop up in the Q&A. And so before we go, I'd like to just again say thank you to Shadell. Thank you to Ruta for taking your time out and sharing so much of yourselves this afternoon, this evening. And also want to thank our guests for tuning in. And if you're watching this later on, thank you for checking out this stream. If there are any final thoughts or words from either of our guests before we close out, feel free.
All right. I just want to say thank you guys for this panel. I think voices matter. Work matters, women matters, culture matters, it all matters. So thank you guys for having us. For anybody watching, check out Aloha Youth Organization of Oregon. If you guys can support, that would be amazing. Also check out Black Pacifica Alliance, which we're really excited about as well. And thank you, EPIC, for having us on this panel, and the National Asian Pacific American Association for having us as well.
Rika?
Yeah, I just want to echo Shadell and say thank you so much for this space to have this conversation, right? I think that it is really important for our voices to be heard and for these conversations to exist in posterity so that they can be spread, so that young people can hear them and be exposed to these kinds of conversations. And, in terms of like things that can be done, things that are happening. There are organizations that are starting to give like unrestricted income supplements to Black and Pacific Islander birthing people in San Francisco and spreading throughout California. And so there are direct ways that we can advocate for. And then also doing things like Shadell is modeling for us by like choosing the things that actually matter and leaning into, you know, our own Indigenous understandings of time and values that like after the collapse of capitalism and after we, you know, are able to reclaim all of our stuff, like what's going to persist is our bloodlines, our families, our cultures, and all these things. That's really what's real. And so I'm grateful to both this conversation. And yeah, Mana Pacifica is on Instagram. You can follow us there to learn about what we're doing and share with folks that might be interested. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of EPIC, NAPOF, and our guest today, thank you everyone for joining us. To stay up to date on these and future events, please sign up on our mailing list at empoweredpi.org and at napof.org. You can also follow us across social media channels. For EPIC, it is at empoweredpi. And you can also follow our panelists today, Shadell at AYOOFOREGON. So, and you can follow Ruta at mana.pacifica on Instagram as well, and Black Pacifica Alliance on Instagram as well. Thank you all again, and we'll see you soon.